everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Good morning, Rush Nation. Happy Wednesday. Good to talk to you all and have the opportunity to talk about something a little different today. I'm going to talk about running backs. It's a big bone of contention in terms of running backs and what the value is on them. And I think that the ADP is a little bit wonky on on these players. And I think people have been burned in this position far too much over the last few years with injury, with volatility. And people have been unsure what to do at the position. They know that in the past they've been league winners, and there are a couple of league winners. And we talked on the show with Pat Fitzmaurice last week about potentially 4 game-changing backs. But what about the position as the whole, and where do we go from here in terms of the running back position? And I think it's really important to get a historical view of the last sort of decade or so. So I've put some data together for the last 11 years. Now, I'm going to put this in an article. I haven't quite decided where I was going to put it. I was trying to get a guide out this year. It's just not going to happen. There's a bit too much has happened. But I've got a load of data, so I'm deciding what to do with it, and I'll put it all out. But I want to share some of this because I feel it's important to share. And so I've got here some data of the last 11 years. And in the last 11 years, we put some milestone markers in here. I want to show you the picture of the running back position in the NFL and why I think there's actually an opportunity to buy into the running back position again, and why I think there's some really good values out there. So we look at where things were in 2013. We're looking at average rush attempts and average number of touches. So touches is rush attempts plus also receptions. So we see here that the average running back in 11 years ago was at 250-ish rushing attempts, and then we had another 50, just over 50 or so catches. Then we saw an escalation in 2014 before we saw a huge nosedive in 2015, before an uplift again to a new peak in 2016, a downlift in 2017, an uplift in 2018. 2018's here, this downshift here. So 16, 17's here, 18's here. Then we've got 19, where we saw a huge peak. A lot of this is driven by Christian McCaffrey's monster year. I should predicate that this is the top 24 players. So it is an average of the top 24 performing running backs of that season. I cut the rest out. Because they're the ones we care about. They're the ones that are going to be on starting rosters in fantasy football. So I've only done the top 24. I should have predicated that at the start. We saw a decline during the COVID years, a little bounce back in 2022, and then a decline. The thing is, these declines here are all sort of at the lowest, or near enough the lowest levels we've seen, other than in 2018. Some of that is injury based, and that covers some of the thinking of this, but also I tend to really like the idea of the contrarian play of when things are trending away in one direction and going down. That's when I want to buy into it, because I think there is only going to be volume for this to go up. Whenever we've seen these volumes as low as they have been in 2023, we saw it here in 2015, it bounced straight back up. We saw it here in 2018, it bounced straight back up. We saw it here in 2021, and here it bounced straight back up. So whenever we've been anywhere near these sorts of lows, it has bounced up the following year. Now, that's not for consistent growth in that direction for the next 2 or 3 years, but in redraft, do we care? We're only caring about 2024, right? So when we're seeing these average number of rush attempts and average number of touches go down, there is always a sharp uptake the following year. So that's the first thing I'd sort of say. And this is reflected very similarly in the number of scrimmage yards. Again, by the top 24 running backs, and these are the average scrimmage yards by years. So again, we saw a lift from 2013 to 2014 that fell right off a cliff in 2015 to an absolute floor, the worst we've seen. A huge rise back up in 2016. So there's clearly a lot of activity here in 2015, which is kind of an outlier to see that consistent huge drop and then back up. And then we see it playing up in this level from 2016. And this is what fantasy players are probably more used to, this sort of level. There's little drops, but then a big rise again up to 2019 to its peak. And then during the COVID years, we saw this 2 years of really steady decline to an absolute floor near the bottom peak here. And then we saw a rise in 2022. And then again, we've seen this sharp decline backwards in 2023. Again, some of that is injury. Some of the best players in the league in 2023 got injured. Jonathan Taylor is just one of those players, for example. And yes, there is the argument about the running back committee. There's less bell cows. Therefore, these top backs probably aren't getting the same level of scrimmage yards. However, there's a huge difference here between the sort of under 1,400 that they achieved in 2023 and this sort of peak of 1,600. And I think we will see a sharp intake upwards of over 100 yards. So I think you're going to see increased performance at the running back position this year, because once again, whenever we've seen these really huge dips and we've got down to these lows, they have climbed in record. They have climbed to a really sharp high the following year. This climbed to 1,600, this climbed to 1,550, just there or thereabouts. So again, I think you're going to see this peak back up to this sort of level or very close to it in 2024. Part of this is also the difference between the RB1 and the RB2. And again, we're looking at the mean. So the mean point between the top 12 scoring players and the mean between the running backs 13 to 24 in the last 11 years. And what we saw here was huge spikes here in 2013, 14. We see good numbers here. And then again, it drops. Again, that 2015 shows record differences. And again, that's probably telling you that the elite players were injured that season. That's kind of the main conclusion you're getting here, and a capped performance. Then we see sharp increases over the next 3 years to the peak. And again, this is a lot of it's driven by Christian McCaffrey's record year in 2019. Again, we're seeing, 2018. The 2019's here, and then we're seeing this sharp decline, and then we get a bit of a spike in 2022, and then we're trending down. Again, I think you're going to see a spike up towards the mean here, which I think will be closer to that sort of 75 to 80 point range difference between the RB1 and RB2. I don't think this is going to steadily decline to 50. And again, we're looking at going contrarian. People who might analyze this might follow the trajectory of going down. I actually believe it's going to go the other way, because we haven't seen, the only time we saw a sustained period of decline was during COVID, when kind of all bets were off. And so I think as well, you're going to see more elite performance at the top end. I don't think it's ever going to go back to the numbers that we saw a few years ago, but I do think it's going to go the other way. And I think there are going to be more bell cow opportunities than there were in 2023. And therefore, I think that the elite performance between RB1 and RB2 will be separated. And so what that also means, if we're thinking there's going to be a differential of 75 to 80 points, this is what I would sort of project between the RB1 and the RB2, it means the value of RB should be rising. And again, the final piece here, when we look at it here, I took some point in times of the RB1 overall, the RB6 overall, the RB12 overall, and then the RB1 mean and the RB2 mean. And we can see here what the average scoring running back one overall tends to do here in PPR over 11 years. And again, so this dip here in 2015 is not a surprise. So this huge spike here. 2019, this is Christian McCaffrey putting on a record year. We see this number is relatively consistent. It tends to hover between sort of 370 to 380 points over these years between 2016 and 2023. So, you can project with a pretty good level of certainty that your RB is going to score, or RB1 overall, if you get the right player, is going to score between 370 to 380 points. Where we're seeing some small declines here over the mean is the RB6 point, so the middle RB1, and we're seeing that here. And again, this follows the line with the RB1 mean, which is the average score of all six running backs versus the actual single point RB6. So these lines will always tend to be pretty close together, but there will be some variance where the mean will be slightly greater than the actual point in time six. And that's just because the elite player has raised the average, and then the floor players underneath didn't do quite so badly either. But they will be pretty closely aligned, as you can see here, that RB6 point mean point is you're looking at 270 points, which is still going to score pretty consistently high up versus those high-end RB1s. So there is a value to taking an RB early here, as we're sort of demonstrating. And then we're looking at the mean point between the where we're looking at the RB12, where the RB12 in scoring finishes, and then where sort of the mean RB2 point is. And the mean RB2 is relatively flat, somewhere around about 180 points at its peak, 185 points at its peak here, and then it sort of tapers off, and it's around that 175 to 180 point mark. So if you're thinking that the RB18 overall is going to score about 170 to 180 points, because that's historically over this trend what they have done, and your RB12 is going to score about 20, 30 points more than that, you then have to start to bake in, does the point of the position taper off? Does the RB12 and the RB18 represent enough value to wait, or do you just get a lot of guys in this range? And so what this data tells me, that getting the first 6, 7, 8 RBs is actually really, really important. And that actually then the next guys kind of cluster up. There is some point differentials here between sort of the RB12 and the RB18, that there is some separation here of about 30 points. It works out to be about 2 points per game, but they do tend to cluster up a little bit more, and the drop off there. So it does mean that you can shoot for one of these elite guys, and then you can wait until sort of RB18 to get your RB2, and then load up even more. Now, what this data isn't showing you is what's outside of the RB2. It does fall off a cliff pretty quickly. I personally think the optimal strategy is to have 3 of these guys. So if you can have 3 top 24 RBs on your roster, that's going to put your roster construction in a really good place. Now, typically in previous years, especially 2019, 2020, you'd have to have paid a high price to get there. This season, very, very far from it. You're actually getting them at a very, very good price in terms of ADP. And so when we look at the ADP, we can actually see that, I'm just pulling it up, we can actually see that you're not having to go too early to get these. And we did this with Pat Fitzmaurice a week ago, but we're going to keep it to PPR scoring. So I'm just pulling it up. Here we are. I'm just going to move my screen a little bit here so this blows up. So we can see here that these are the consensus players, and we can see where you're picking them overall. That the RB12 is going at pick 53, which is in the 5th round in 12-team leagues. The RB18 is going at the pick 76, which is the 7th round in 12-team leagues. So you're getting a good feel here, and they start to run off the board here. Now, I actually think some of these players, as I've talked about in the past, Aaron Jones, I think, is undervalued. Wide receivers are undervalued. I think Alvin Kamara is essentially really undervalued here. I think these 3 players really strike me. James Conner, again, is another player I think is hugely undervalued, that really bring up these players, and the players that probably be slightly wary of are players like Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs, are players that I'd be slightly cautious of. So I think really just looking at these sort of values here, Saquon Barkley is another one I think is overpriced. When I look at these sort of ranges and think, okay, you can realistically get 3 of these guys in the top 7 rounds. You can actually build a really nice roster of 1 QB if you wanted, or 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs, and really load up there. And I think you can get them at good value. Whether or not that those values hold, I don't know. And that's kind of the scary thought. So I think I'd be setting my tiers and thinking about, okay, so James Conner's the last running back 3 I kind of want, and I'm quite happy to miss out on a couple of these guys. But effectively, you've got 22 players and you want to try and think about where you get 3 of these 22, I ideally think you want to be getting one of McCaffrey, Robinson, Hall, or Taylor. I don't have Gibbs as high. We talked about this on the show with Pat Fitzmaurice. I think these are the 4 leaders in the position, but I think the next level of Achane, Gibbs, Williams, and I'd have Etienne and Henry, I think are all really good options there in that sort of second tier. And then I'd be moving Barkley back into this third tier with White and Mixon. For example, Mixon's one that's heavily rising on boards. People have really bought into what he can do. And so, you need to think about where you can try and pick up these players. Yes, you don't want to necessarily compromise on wide receiver too much, but there is a way in PPR to grab both of these to get a good solid base of 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs in the first 7 rounds and get your guys. And that's what I'd be trying to execute. And I think, for me, I'd probably take the 3rd wide receiver before I take the third running back before I take the 3rd wide receiver, because I think that sort of wide receiver 3 range is a lot more diluted as a pool. I think you've got a lot more sort of stability at that position. And so I think you can pick up a really good wide receiver 3 at a really good value. So I'd probably be tending to go a start of 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers probably makes a lot of sense. And then you probably go, you might throw a quarterback in there, or you might throw a tight end in there, and then you might go running back, wide receiver, and that might be your start. I think that's a pretty good balanced start, and I think that puts you in a good place. Again, when we go back and you look at some of the points in here, you get this and you understand it a little bit more as to why this is important and why I think there's a bounce back opportunity. And I think if you start your leagues with 3 running backs in the first 7 rounds, I think you're going to be in a really good position to take advantage of the bounce back up to those upper echelons. And I don't think they're going to necessarily reach the top peak, but I think they're going to be a lot better than they were in 2022. So this is the problem if you draft off 2022 points. You aren't really taking into consideration peaks and troughs. You're just saying, right, they're going to do exactly what they did last year, and that never really happens. So there is a huge trough going in the running back position, which means that whenever we've seen this trough and they get down to the levels that they were last season, there tends to be a peak up. There's a few reasons for that. One could be better injury luck at the position. Just coaches are tending to use the run a bit more. They feel there's a bit more stability at the position. There's a whole bunch of reasons as to why this will be the case. Ultimately, none of that overly matters as to the reasons why. I can put a few compelling reasons as I just have, and we could really sort of document that and write that down into a lot more detail. The ultimate fact is that, as we've seen over the last 11 years, and if I went back to previous 11 years, you'll probably see very similar, where we've seen troughs at this level, they tend to rise the following year, and that's what we're expecting to see here. So that's kind of where we are with the running back position. It gives you a bit of an overview. We'll do a bit more of this in more detail. We'll look at other positions over the next week as well. And you can start to get a bit more comfortable as to what we're doing. But I think from a draft strategy perspective, I would be focusing on running backs a little bit more, go against the grain, build a contrarian build, take advantage of the ADP values, because the ADP values are telling you they're following last year's trend, that they think they're going to continue to trend south. And I think if you're going to keep following that trend, that's a very dangerous place to be. And if you follow the rest of the pool, it dilutes and you're not going to come up with an advantage. So take advantage of where everyone is going, embrace the variance, and start to build a picture towards taking RBs a bit earlier. I'm not saying you flood your roster with RBs 1, 2, and 3. I think if you get 3 in the first 7 rounds, that builds a really nice build from a redraft perspective. From the Dynasty perspective, it's a completely different argument. You'll also notice that the Dynasty community and those that really push the Dynasty community tend to really undervalue running backs. And with the spike in Dynasty play, in the amount of people that play Dynasty and Dynasty theory, they tend to be out on running backs because they find it difficult to shift that mindset from redraft, from Dynasty to redraft. And this is where redraft specialists tend to have a bit of advantage, because these players are undervalued. And you notice that some of these older players, for no real sensible reason, are being heavily undervalued. And that's the James Connors of the world, the Alvin Cooks of the world, because of their age. And that's the Dynasty influence that's pushing that price down. I'm happy to profit on those prices. So you should be too in a redraft. So keep this as a redraft focus. Use this analysis If you find this analysis useful, then please do feel free to ask me where I'm going to put it out, and I'll tell you where it is when it comes out. I'm going to share this with the Patreons today. So if you aren't a Patreon and you want first access to this, you can subscribe. That's patreon.com/5yard rush, and you can sign up and be a Patreon, and I'll share this data with you, and you'll get access to my projections and access to some of the interesting tidbits and stuff I'm going to be posting. I did a good piece on useful stats to know where to find them and links to all of those last week, so you'll have access to that and all my other Patreon casts, which is just sort of fantasy strategy and how to sort of make the best of these contrarian situations and leverage through them. It's just me sort of, it's a bit of a brain dump. I just sort of talk and give my thoughts and then can also answer questions. So that's all in there. Don't forget to also sign up to the listener leagues as well. They are filling up very nicely, so I'm looking forward to playing with anyone that joins those listener leagues. There is a minimum charity donation to those, one per person at the moment, so please do sign up to those. But I hope you find this useful and enjoyable, and if you did, then do tell 2 friends, get them to tell 2 friends. Following the old famous Marcus Grant line and not doing quite so well, but do subscribe. I've seen a lot of great views on the YouTube channel, which is great, but a lot of them are from non-subscribers, so please do hit the subscribe button so you get access to all these. You know we're going to be doing this Monday to Friday every morning, so do tune in for those, and thanks as always for the support. Don't forget to ask questions in the YouTube comments and I will answer them. So if you got any questions on this stuff and you want to know a bit more, then do pop in a question in there. But that'll do it. Thanks so much, as always, for tuning in. Be back tomorrow for another morning show and potentially a flagship show as well. But don't forget, as always, Rush Nation, keep rushing.